All those in, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Any abstentions?
Well, let me go back to, we're talking about, I just want to make sure I'm clear,
35
535.
through 548.
All right, I've got some no's.
Okay, Commissioner Elliott, indicate your no's, please.
535.
535
Through 545.
through 545.
And a question on 548. Could Jim, you explain the reasons for these amendments? Or did Commissioner Powell, was that discussed already?
That was covered specifically in the Finance Committee.
All right, so since I wasn't there.
Is it okay if you get that after the meeting, being that we already voted on the resolutions?
Okay. I want to know why the amendments, Mr. Koenig, yeah,
Any other questions?
that's it.
Okay, thank you. We will now move to resolutions 549 through 569, but I would request that we vote, vote on resolution 562 separately.
So move, second?
Are you making that motion?
I would make that motion, yes.
Okay, Commissioner Elliott has made that motion that we vote on 562 separately or discuss 562 separately. There's second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Thompson. So I will now entertain a motion to vote on resolutions 549 through 569 with the exception of 562.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Brennan. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner White. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Now we'll move to...
I have a question, though.
Oh,
On the
Commissioner?
BOCES contracts. How many children, Dr. Rivera, are we referring to BOCES? And they appeared to, well, there are two resolutions for BOCES, one for Monroe.
Right. I'll have to get you that exact number. I don't know how many students right now offhand are being referred for BOCES services.
Why $12 million? Why, I guess I need to understand the cost of this.
Are you on
Health
557,
Our health service.
558 is also 12 million?
that's our health services. I
Okay.
believe, and that's why.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because remember, we've been doing, when the county cut us, we had to
Oh,
look at
okay.
health services through BOCES, so that's why.
Okay.
And that's the cost of our health services.
Okay, but somewhere in here I don't see, I thought I read this. Okay.
Okay. And so, you have any no's on that, Commissioner Elliott?
No.
Okay. Resolution 562, I will entertain a motion on 562. So move second.
Second.
Second, discussion on resolution 562.
Yeah, I sent an email to my colleagues, to all of you in reference to this. I had some concern about that we would have a resolution introduced to enter into an agreement with a search firm for a chief financial officer when, in fact, we know that Superintendent Rivera is going to be leaving. I tend to believe that this is the prerogative of the new superintendent to be able to identify the person that he wants to have in this position. And if you recall in the email, I went on to say that the DNC did an editorial on the fact that Dr. Rivera had some concerns about this issue in Boston when the board chairperson was involved in the hiring of a chief administrative person, if I'm saying this correctly, as well as she was involved with the hiring of a new academic affairs officer. And so I just believe that we should give the same kind of consideration to our new superintendent, that where he can determine who his own CFO would be. And so I would move, if that's appropriate, that we pull this resolution and give the next superintendent the opportunity to identify his own CFO.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Commissioner Powell.
I'll just say what I communicated already in emails in response to that concern, is that all we need to do is look at the search process for our new superintendent to realize that this is not premature. I mean, we've had a contract with a search firm for our new superintendent for several months now, and we're only just now sending out the notice with the job description. So I think, had this come before us last month, it might have been premature, but at this stage, I think that it's an appropriate time to start assembling a list of qualified candidates, so that by the time we do have a superintendent in place, we will have a list of finalists for that superintendent to consider. I think it's appropriate at this stage. I don't think that we're going to end up in a position where we have names but no superintendent to weigh in on that. I think we're going to end up with a superintendent first and a CFO second, and that's exactly how things ought to be.
Commissioner Thompson.
Before we pay $55,000 for a consultant to help us identify finalists for the CFO position, I'm inclined to agree that we should hold off. We don't know if the next superintendent will come prepared to bring along a CFO, for one thing, and we have not had discussion with the current interim CFO to find out if, in fact, his service might be extended to give us some leeway so that we don't find ourselves in a bind with the superintendent and no CFO. So I think that at least holding off until we get some more information. We don't know all the reasons why the last search for a CFO was so protracted. So rather than jump the gun tonight on this, I think that we can at least hold off until we gather more information, find out how quickly we might be able to get a search going, if we think that if the interim CFO would be willing to stay in place for a reasonable amount of time to allow us to do a good search. And so I don't see any reason to vote on this tonight. If we do, I would not support it.
Commissioner White.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I mean, I look at the dollar amount. $55,000 is a lot of money to spend when we may not have to spend it. I mean, it's entirely possible. Again, I haven't been in this business too long, but a new superintendent might have a chief financial officer in mind and might say, why don't you come with me from wherever he's from.
Timbuktu.
Right. So I just think that, and more importantly, I think we ought not to tie the hands of somebody, even by having started a process. We want to communicate to the new superintendent that he or she will have the opportunity to make the selection that he or she wants to make. And I think even a process that's begun that gives them a list of candidates is suggestive that we're not going to let this person do the job that they were paid to do.
Right. I'm inclined to agree, so I will entertain a motion to table this until a new superintendent is hired, unless, is there any other discussion on this before I entertain a motion to table?
Just a brief question.
Commissioner Brennan.
Do we, supposing we find ourselves in a situation where the interim superintendent, who's been doing a wonderful job, by the way, CFO, who's been doing a terrific job, is unable or unwilling, for whatever legitimate reason he may have, to stay beyond when he said he would be. Is there a downside to delay? I think all the misgivings that were raised here are reasonable. I'm a little uncomfortable having this discussion in front of him while he's sitting in the audience without us.
I believe that's a discussion that we should have in executive session.
I do too. But if we take action, if we delay action tonight, and he's unable to do that, are we going to find ourselves in a situation we don't want to be?
I believe
Either an interim superintendent or a process started in time to select a CFO.
Allow me to ask for clarification, but I believe the current CFO is here through October. Is that correct?
Right.
That is correct. We had that discussion today,
Okay.
at least.
So I'll entertain a motion
At
to.
least.
I will make a motion to table this resolution until next month. I think that we can get a lot more clarity in the course of 30 days.
There's a motion on the table. There's a motion on the there's a motion to table, and from parliamentary procedure, a table goes straight to a vote. The motion is to table it for 1 month.
So no friendly amendment can be
Well, as a matter of fact,
No.
tabling is always until your next business meeting. I don't even need to state that.
Right.
I guess I need to understand more about, well,
But Commissioner Elliott, there's no discussion on.
Okay,
on a
It's
like
motion.
calling the question.
On a motion to table, it goes straight to a vote. But I will just say that when you make a motion to table, you are correct. It does go to the next business meeting, so we can table it again at the next business meeting from a parliamentary perspective.
all right, why do we have to table it? Can't we just remove it altogether and allow the next superintendent to present to us a search firm or a candidate, you know, that he selects? It seems to me the district, and that's not our role to manage the district. We're policymakers. And so I think that we need to just remove this altogether until the next superintendent presents this to us.
The short answer is because parliamentary procedure, we're already in the motion. There's a motion on the floor.
Okay, so the motion is to table it for 30 days?
Well, whenever in parliamentary procedure, when you table a resolution, it automatically goes to the next meeting. So it would come up at our next meeting, and we can table it again.
Or the
So am I
superintendent
able to make another motion?
You can't,
A table goes straight to a vote. So on a table, you can vote yes or no.
All right, but I also want to make a motion to remove the resolution altogether.
Okay, if this motion fails, then when we go straight to this vote from a table, then you can make another motion if this motion fails, if you want to make a resolution to move it all together.
Okay.
So we'll move forward with a vote on the table. Not this table, but the table of the resolution. Commissioner Brennan.
Yes.
Commissioner Brennan, yes. Commissioner Elliott?
No.
No. Commissioner Powell?
yes?
Yes. Commissioner Thompson?
Yes.
Commissioner White?
Yes.
And I vote no, but that passes, so this is tabled until the next meeting. That concludes our resolutions. We will now move to unfinished business from previous meetings. We have none, so we will go under new business, introduction of the Department of African and African American Studies. And I will allow Commissioner White to briefly make a statement on his proposed resolution.
I will be very brief, Commissioner Evans. No need to go into detail. I think all my colleagues for quite some time have had the copy of the resolution. I think some copies have circulated in the community. First of all, I want to say thank you particularly to members of the board who really have laid the groundwork for this, what I believe to be unprecedented effort. I know I've learned that Commissioner Evans and Commissioner Elliott have been outspoken proponents of Afrocentric education, and I assume that my other colleagues have also supported such changes. But I think that having brought speakers here, and the superintendent is to be credited for that as well, I think it laid the groundwork for people saying this is the time. I think we heard a number of speakers indicate that. I also want to thank the Rochester Teachers Association and its leadership team, including the folks at the Rochester Teacher Center, who have also laid some important groundwork. I think there's real opportunities to collaborate here in terms of in-service training once this department gets started. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the community for their support. And even in the one person who said they did not support this particular resolution, I thank her and others for holding our feet to the fire. That's why resolutions like this, that's how change happens. Having said that, I am respectfully moving that this particular resolution that I've passed out some time ago be forwarded to the Quality Assurance Committee with the only requirement that the Quality Assurance Committee report back by March the 15th, 2007 on its findings.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I will second the motion.
Okay, it has been seconded, and now discussion. Commissioner Thompson.
As long as I'm clear, and if I could just see, as long as it's clear that the QA committee is just reporting back on its finding, because as I explained to Commissioner White, I'm a little uncomfortable with the very last portion of the resolves, which is that the superintendent immediately create this department. I think part of what QA will be doing will be looking at the cost and the logistics of creating a department, et cetera, which I fully support. But I just feel like this piece is almost too binding because it sounds like it's a done deal without having had discussion about logistics and costs and other factors. But I definitely will second it because I think it's an idea whose time has more than come.
Any other discussion under this motion? Commissioner?
Yeah, Commissioner Evans, I do support the resolution conceptually. However, I would ask us not to rush into it. I think that we should have community input. I think we should also bring in some Afrocentric Black scholars. Dr. Juwanza Kunjufa, Dr. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Naeem Akbar, Wade Nobles. I think that if we're going to do this department justice, that we really need to do a detailed plan of how we roll it out. But I would also add that it's just not an African American studies department, meaning that it's only history. Because I don't know if some of you watched the NOVA presentation of Dr. Julian Percy, who's a scientist and who synthesized the cortisol, which I didn't know. And so my point is that we have to have an Afrocentric curriculum. It has to be throughout all of our courses. It has to be included in science. It has to be included in math. I mean, we need to study the pyramids. One of the things that I remember Dr. Juwanza Kunjufu saying, no one will take the kind of effort that has been taken against a people if they didn't have power, if they didn't have a history. And if some of us who know our history know that Africa was in existence farther than Europe. Africa has 3,000, 4,000 years of history, if not more. Europe, 850. Okay? And so we need to go back to the motherland. And so the question becomes, and I remember a speaker saying, is this about white supremacy? We need to be very clear about that. And we also need to teach our children about if they know who they are, then no one can have power over them. We have to connect that. And so I would be interested in ensuring that we take this farther than just an African American history department, but that as they go out into that world, when people look at the color of their skin and think that they are worthless and useless, similar to what the gentleman said, he feels inferior when he goes into an elevator or he sees two white men with suits on, he should not feel that way. But if he knows who he is, doesn't matter who you're around, because you are the one who has power. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the proposal? Any other discussion? I would just say that,
Yes.
Commissioner Brennan.
Yeah, I just wanted to, when we heard the speakers today, earlier in the evening, and they were some of the most incisive speakers I've ever heard at a school board meeting in all the time I've been here. I wanted to say that first, and I wanted to respond at this time because they were addressing this proposal. Commissioner White and the superintendent are to be very much commended for taking the lead in moving this proposal forward, and not because it is any sort of balkanization of our education, but because, as Howard Eagle said, and I wish sometimes that we would listen to Howard Eagle a little more carefully than sometimes we're inclined to, because he makes a great deal of sense a lot of times if we would take the time to listen to him, because it's truthful. And a more complete, more inclusive description of history and education in history is in the interest of every single child of every background in this district. And that's why we should move in this direction. So I wanted to say that. I know some of the other speakers also raised the question of our reluctance and our difficulty in talking about race. A reference was made to people's jaws tightening and people getting nervous when the subject comes up. And that's truer words were never spoken. We don't have candid discussions about this. We are entirely too afraid of offending one another, entirely too afraid of putting the issues on the table. And I think our hearts are hardened in the process, and we don't have the discussions that we need to have. And not only is there obviously racism in the city school district, racism in society, prejudice of all kinds, the most pernicious kind of prejudice is the unconscious prejudice. We think, well, you know, we're not running around in nightshirts burning crosses, so they can't be talking about us. And it's exactly when you almost like your faith, when you think you have all the answers and you think you're perfect and you think you don't have to examine your own behavior and your own unconscious prejudices, is often when you do the most damage. So I would hope that all of us would consider that in all the decision making that we make. And while we're on the subject of racism in education governance in the city school district, I'd like to talk about the move that has gotten very little coverage in this district that is afoot from the state and the mayor's office to abolish elected school boards, or certainly move in that direction. Now, we don't have all the details of what that legislation entails, but this is something that has come up every year. The notion is that because there are difficulties with urban education, the solution is that we need to do away with the democratic process in urban education governance. We need to make the school board appointed, or take away the school board's authority to the point where its authority is meaningless. I served on the Hilton School Board 20 years ago. If you went out to Hilton or out to Greece, which has arguably as many problems as the city school district does, and said, the solution is, we're all frustrated with the problems, but the solution is that you just don't have the sense, you people, to elect your school board members. Try selling that in Greece. Try selling that in Hilton. But they're trying to sell it here, and it's possibly working its way through the state legislature with hardly any discussion at all in the media or here. And the ultimate check on whatever our limitations are as board members is that the people who were out here tonight not only can come and pick it, but that election time they can tell each and every one of us to hit the road. And that's a democratic process. And the people who live in this city should have the same access to democratic process in the governance of their public schools that people in Hilton have and that people in Greece have. And so I hope that those of you who are still here will go back to Councilman McFadden, who has this concern about how if you had the conditions in suburban schools that you have in city schools, there'd be a state of emergency. And he's right. But I hope you'll go back to him and to your city council members and to your state legislators and to Mayor Duffy, who ran saying he opposed rollbacks in democratic process and education governance, who promised that when he sought election to that position, and urge him to oppose these efforts to deny people the right to elect their own school board members in their own community.
Thank you. I'll just say very briefly that I support this proposal. I was blessed in that I was taught history from the day I was born, particularly African-American history. I think it is important that people that have a background in this area be consulted before we move forward. They can tell you what pitfalls to avoid because they've tried this, been there, done that. Trust me. I was involved in a protest at the University of Rochester in 1999 to restore the Department of African-American Studies. And I think that there are pitfalls that happen, and there's no mistake why there's only 2 in the country, because there are pitfalls that can be avoided. And I think that we need to take best practices from other places to make sure that we do not fall into those pitfalls. This department is going to be successful. Any other comments on this before we call the question? Last statement, Commissioner Powell.
2 questions. One, I want to ask Commissioner Brennan for clarification. What you're saying, I think might be implied, I want to bring it right out into the open. Are you saying that the link between this resolution and the potential changes to board governance are allowed to exist because we live in a racist community that thinks that the urban student and the urban electorate doesn't matter as much as our suburban? Is that what you're saying?
There's a widespread belief, particularly on the part of the proponents of this change, that really the city residents, maybe because they're of color, maybe because they're poor, maybe because they're disproportionately other things that more affluent communities are not, yes, don't have the sense to elect their own representatives. That's at the root of this. Of course it is. And frankly, if you talk to a lot of them privately, they'll say that candidly. Well, the problem is, well, they can elect their school board out in Hilton because those are educated people and informed people, and they're involved, you know, and they pay attention to their schools. But people in the city, my goodness, you know, are you kidding? And that is the attitude, and I think that's something that needs to be confronted.
Okay.
It's germane to this resolution because we had speakers about institutional racism in this district, and I thought it was very ironic that we heard a great deal of discussion, much of it truthful, about unconscious prejudice, not malevolent, deliberate, mean-spirited, but unconscious prejudice. That's often more damaging than the people running around in nightshirts.
Right. Okay, you had a second
My
question?
second question ties back to what you just said, Commissioner Evans, about not rushing the process. And I guess I would like to hear from the proponent, from Van, who attached a time frame to this. Why 1 month? What do we think we can accomplish in a single meeting of the Quality Assurance Committee? Why have you attached a timeline to it?
Commissioner
motion.
White.
I'm sorry, my motion was that the Q&A committee merely report back. I did that with the last resolution, and I do that with this because I think we need to stay on top of these things. It may very well be, and I would expect that they're not going to have any department to present at that time. There's people that we need to talk to, that the superintendent's staff has to talk to and research. This may take many, many, many months, but I just think as part of good professional practice that you should keep your eye on the prize, and how we do that is just adjourning it every month. This may be adjourned back to committee 3 or 4 times, and then when it gets out of quality assurance, it may go to finance, it may go to policy. But that's the only reason why I have that 1 month in there. Not that I expect that we're going to have any huge department on March the 15th.
Commissioner Thompson.
And as chair of QA, I'm very comfortable coming back on March 15th and saying, this is as far as we have gotten, and we are not prepared to offer anything of substance. And depending on the scheduling availability of QA members, it's possible that we'll have more than one meeting before March 15th. But we're only human. We have other things on our plate, and I'm quite comfortable coming back saying that this is as far as we've gotten and more time is required.
Okay, thank you. One last thing on this.
Just one last thing that
Yes,
I would also
Commissioner
point out,
Elliott.
Commissioner Evans, is there's been some concern about tying the curriculum to test scores and to the exams. And so that's certainly something that we want to make sure that we can tie in. As you know, I think there are very few questions on the state exams that relate to African American issues or African issues. And so we also, that's a concern that we have when we're implementing this, that we can most certainly tie it in to on the state level. And that may be where we come in as politicians to go on the state level and have them to change those exams.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So I offer that for consideration.
Which, by the way, might get other school districts to say, hey, wait a second, we got to start teaching African American studies. Right? Pie in the sky.
And I think that parents should learn it too, because that's the problem. That's part of it too. Everyone in the community needs to learn this, no matter what your color, race, creed, or whatever. All right, I'm going to call the question on this. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? Okay. I will now. I'm going to announce our next. I'm going to announce our next meeting, but
hold
then I'm
on.
going to entertain them.
But I do have some additional new business.
Oh, okay. Still under the banner of new business. Commissioner White.
Thank you.
We still have speakers too. I
Yeah,
apologize.
and I'll be very, very brief with this, as is my practice. If you could do me a favor, Shirley, and just sort of pass it down. Actually, let me keep one. And I appreciate the fact that you all are very indulgent. I got to preface my remarks by saying I am trained as a lawyer, and as lawyers are repeatedly told in our upbringing, professional upbringing, that you should write everything down and make your arguments on paper. So I realize this practice of resolutions is a bit unusual, but please understand, I come at this experience different from most of you all, and that's why I have a tendency to present my ideas and projects in resolution form. So having made that apology, I'm going to continue to do it this way. This particular resolution is new business. I am concerned, and many people in this community are concerned, that we have made some progress in this community with respect to making sure our homes, our apartments, our houses are lead-free. There is a host of municipal legislation, federal legislation that talks about keeping our properties lead-free at the federal level. The federal government tells homeowners you cannot sell a property without at least certifying or claiming that the property is lead-free or you know of no lead problems. We have lead inspectors going throughout the city, making sure that our citizens are safe from lead-free, doing wipe tests and so forth. It occurred to me the other day, as a result of the Lead Coalition and other good members in this community, that we have not looked at our own house, if you will, that the district needs to make sure that our children are being educated in lead-free environments. Surely, if we require that of landlords and property owners and homeowners who are selling properties, we must require it of ourselves. If we believe that a child can suffer toxic damage, permanent irreparable damage, because he's at unacceptable levels in his home and find that intolerable, we must similarly have an intolerance to such an environment in our schools. And that, with that having been said, and not even offering up any medical evidence, because I think it's, once again, it's a no-brainer, that the kind of damage that lead can cause, particularly to our constituency. Everybody knows it causes a host of behavioral problems and cause all kinds of academic challenges. So with that having been said, I have prepared a resolution which describes what I would argue is justification for a new policy that calls for lead-free schools. We have smoke-free schools. We have a wellness policy, and our wellness policy says you can't smoke in schools. We have a wellness policy that says you can't do drugs in schools. Well, surely, if we can have a policy that says you can't smoke and do drugs, we ought to have a policy that says you can't expose kids to lead poisoning. How do we, in fact, know that our children are just being poisoned at home? Is it a possibility that they're being poisoned in school? And my God, we don't want that to be the case. So I've done a little something different with this resolution. I have attached, and Shirley, you will probably really appreciate this, the last statement in the resolve, the second page says, resolve that the Rochester City School District should amend its wellness policy to require that all district schools be free of toxic lead. And then it says, see attached proposed lead-free schools policy. And I have drafted a 3-page policy that would really just be incorporated into the wellness policy. It is formatted the exact same way that existing policies are. There is a section that describes the purpose of lead-free schools. There's a section that even provides definitions. There's a section that talks about creating lead-free schools. And there finally is 2 sections on maintaining lead-free schools and lead-free lifestyles. Not everybody has this, but I trust that when you have a chance to examine it, that you will see that this particular policy makes sense. We cannot be hypocrites on this subject. If we're demanding this of our community residents, we've got to demand it for ourselves. At this particular juncture, all that I am requesting is that, and actually my intention was to do this next month, but I thought this was so urgent that it needed to be done this month, that this particular resolution be forwarded to the Policy Committee. I've spoken to Commissioner Brennan about this. I think this is where this particular resolution would lie, given the fact that we do have a wellness policy already. And my hope is that as part of that motion, that this particular resolution will come back on March the 15th with some discussion from the Policy Committee. Not any decision, but perhaps some discussion.
Commissioner, first off, there's a motion on the floor. You made your motion. Is there a second to the
I'll
motion?
second it.
Second to the motion for the purpose of discussion, Commissioner Brennan.
Yes, first of all, again, I appreciate the work that Commissioner White has done on this, and there have been discussions, and there have been discussions among several board members about this. It's critically important. I do want people to understand, though, that, and I think the resolution's fine, and some of us make requests that matters go before committees by letters that we circulate, by written requests, by verbal requests, but you need not, the board need not pass a resolution, just so everybody understands, to require the Policy Committee to take up a matter like this. Frankly, if this resolution were not passed, we would still take it up. And we intend to, as I announced earlier in the meeting. So while the resolution perhaps is good as a kind of reinforcement of our commitment on the issue, when a concern like this arises, it's perfectly permissible to advance it other ways. And I wanted to be clear about that. Also, I wanted to also let Commissioner White know that this is the sort of policy that's going to benefit from access to a great legal mind like his own. And we will be, working with him and involving him, although he's not a member of the policy committee, to whatever extent he's willing to help us draft a policy that's sound and effective.
Thank you. Dr. Rivera has some comments on this lead issue.
I would just like to say that as part of the review of this proposed policy, assuming, or should it be advanced to the policy committee, I think it'd be very important that of course, we engage our staff and our facility staff and look at some of the work that has been done, current procedures that exist, our current lead abatement efforts, and other training efforts that we're currently providing for our custodians in an effort to abate our schools of lead. But I also agree that we need to turn up the heat on lead abatement throughout our schools. We have a number of old schools that are still have, and I visited one particular school today where I went into one classroom and it still has those old tin ceilings that were put in place 100 years ago, and they don't hold paint very well. So when they were painted over with lead paint and then repainted again, as those chips come down, they can present a hazard. And I think we need to take other steps short term, and I've asked Jim Coney to talk and work with our facilities people about assessing all of those older buildings that have those tin ceilings in particular, as well as to look at other areas where we might increase our lead abatement efforts and perhaps even spend much more than we already are with the contractor that we currently have to do lead abatement. Second thing is, as we look at our own facility modernization plan, there is an accommodation for that and requirements associated with that, and to the extent that this policy would have perhaps some serious financial implications on our facility modernization plan, that would need to be addressed as part of this review of the policy as well.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question on this item. All those in favor of sending this item to the policy committee, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that item will go to the policy committee. We will now move to speakers not addressing an agenda item. I will call you up. You have, when you hear the beep, that means please conclude your remarks. I want to thank you all for being patient so far. First up is Dwayne Simmons. Is Dwayne Simmons here? Okay. James Simmons. Is James Simmons here?
For having me here tonight. Well, I come here to address about the violence in the school. Unless you have children in the school system, then you don't know nothing about my pain and my frustration. All right? Second of all, I want to start out that Christ anointed y'all, okay? And the people chose y'all to sit at the city gates, to make sound judgment, to have good wisdom, and to have good understanding. All right? I'm a frustrated parent. I got a 14-year-old, took her out of the Catholic school system and put him in the school system. I had to pull her out of school because of the violence. Put her into another one of y'all schools, which is less violent, but she lacking in the education part. Because what she was getting at the other school, she was taking high honors, all right? 3.8 grade point average, dropped down to 0. Now, y'all said, well, there's a few apples in the basket. Pull out the bad apples, keep the basket, with the good apples. Y'all pouring all the apples out of the basket. It ain't doing me no good. I'm a good paying tax citizen. Been one ever since I was 14. The school system telling my daughter, point blank, I either got two choices. Put her back in the parochial school or move out of the city. I don't know why the county can educate their kids. It's oblivious to me. They got a 90%, 99.9% graduation rate. How come our children can't get it? What's the difference? They all children. They all being educated. The only thing that I can say how we can curb this violence is, first of all, get the African American Studies, make it a requirement to graduate, make the county do it, send half our kids to the county, send half of their kids to the city school district. That'll cut the violence right there, right in half. But we all know we fighting against flesh and blood, so that ain't gonna even happen. That ain't gonna even happen. It ain't gonna even happen like that. So what do? We gotta work with what we got. We honestly gotta work with what we got. We trust y'all. We vote y'all in, okay, to do what's right, to have good judgment. All right? I mean, I am very upset. And as a lot of other parents is probably just as upset as I am, but they didn't come down and speak their piece. If they did, y'all might have a full room of parents up in here.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons.
Mr. Simmons, I know you've waited a long time tonight, but if you could just wait a little bit after the meeting, I'd like to have one of my staff members meet with you and get more information. We would like to talk to you more about your daughter, her situation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I just want to apologize to Mr. Simmons because he did call me, and I dropped the ball on that. So, Mr. Simmons, I offer you an apology for not being able to follow through at this time. I just wanted to say that publicly because I did drop the ball on that. I was sick at one point, but then I dropped the ball, and I do apologize to you for that.
Thank you. Myra Brown. No, take your time.
Oh, my.
And I heard you had surgery on both, so.
Yes, I did.
Oh, man.
So it's a pleasure to be walking. I'm here as a parent to just address you about dismantling systemic and institutional racism. I want to say that systemic and institutional racism is a huge problem in our city and in our world. The flip side of racism that we hardly ever talk about is white privilege and white power and how we maintain that within systems and the way in which we deliver service. Almost every system and institution in the United States was created intentionally and constructed legally to serve white people exclusively. And I believe that how institutions begin will continue to impact the experiences of the people who engage them. I think over time, we've confused diversity work with racial justice work, and I think the work that's left to do is to do the racial justice work. So I'm here to encourage you to take up the charge of developing a 20-year plan for dismantling systemic and institutional racism. Racial justice work, it works. Dismantling racism work works. It's effective, and there's a way to do it. There are resources to have that done. In a district that has 85% white teachers and 85% students of color, I've had a number of experiences with just me and my family, and I've emailed you those experiences, so I don't need to go over those because I think you can read those. And the purpose is not to really air laundry, but to just say that we could look at these situations and say, well, they're isolated, or we can accept the fact that maybe this is an indication that there's a larger systemic and institutional problem, that if we work together intentionally, that we can dismantle racism. It is said that it only takes 20 years to dismantle, 20 years to change a seemingly permanent culture. Racism has become a permanent culture in our society, and if we work intentionally in our time, we can see the changes and become the changes we want to see. So I would hope that you do some listening around what the experiences of racism are with parents and students and educators and anybody in the system who is struggling with that, and have the discussions that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Charlie Richardson. Charlie Richardson.
My name is Charlie Richardson, and I happen to be from Fairport, New York. And Mr. Evans, Vice President, Mr. Riviera, and board members, I'd like to address you on something that I heard a lot about tonight, and I'm very concerned about too. I've spent the last 22 months in the city of Rochester, morning, noon, and night, talking to 13-year-old prostitutes, 7-year-old drug dealers, their parents, their grandparents, businesses, everybody all through, asking them what is the problem. And you know, what their biggest thing is they're saying is, no one will listen to us. No one will listen. I have no problem of communicating with all these people. Why? I get down to their level and I listen. And I am on their level because I've only got a GED education. And boy, do I very upset with myself that this many years went by, that I had to work for a good many people working 50, 60 hours a week because I didn't stay in school. They want to stay in school. They want the education, but not the way that they're getting it. What they want to do is to be able to know at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old what their possibilities are. You know, we have so much talent in the inner city of Rochester, but you know what? We're holding them down. We throw money at them. We give them projects that we think they need as adults. It's not what they want. They want to be able to have some say. They want to be able to have some vocational work, what they possibly could do. And it can all happen. I have said on the committee of the Rochester Children's Zone, which Dr. Rivera, I really commend you for doing. 164 people, okay, spent a lot of time sorting out what is the problem. And I will tell you, you have somebody in your midst that did a fantastic job for this board and their community. And that's Jana Carlisle, of how she actually monitored and put together this overall program, and it's now coming to a conclusion. What I ask you to do is to please get out into the community, okay? Listen to what these children are saying. They want a better future. And what our job is to do is to open the door to opportunity for them. Give them the opportunity to learn in a method that they can learn. Not everybody's alike. And you know, one of the biggest things is I said on the Adult Education and Jobs Committee, there is something coming down the pike. It's been coming down the pike for about a year and a half, but nobody wants to listen. And if I could I have just one more minute, please?
Just conclude your remarks, Mr. Richardson. Go ahead.
Okay. Number one, jobs. We can have all kinds of jobs. Our school district is getting ready to spend $1.2 billion in the next couple of years. We have a building down, if you want to really have vocational, and all kinds of training in it, at the old Boston Lawn building across from the health department. Okay? That building could be had, and we could take our people that are not working now and get trades in there, have them remodel that building inside, learn how to do carpentry work, electrical work, plumbing work, drywall, painting. And then a year and a half, 2 years down the road, as the time comes, here we got people locally working now, paying taxes, buying houses, working on our school systems that's going to need to be replaced.
Okay.
One last thing is, I'm looking for a sponsor. I would like to take 30 to 35 young people that are not going to pass this year, okay, at different age levels, and have 5 chaperones to take a bus trip, an educational bus trip, for 2 days. One down to New York City, the Harlem Children's Zone. Let them see that. See if that is something they can live with, okay? Maybe some of these kids, we can come back, we can get them through graduation this year. Day number two, I would like to see us be able to get our assemblymen and state senate and the new governor meet with these children in session where they can build a petition between now and hopefully before April 1st where they vote on the new budget, that they can go down
Mr.
and
Richardson?
present their case.
Mr. Richardson, unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut you off there, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Ring. Is Ron Ring here? Joan Roby Davidson? Joan Roby Davidson.
Good evening. My name is Joan Roby Davison, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the Coalition to Prevent Lead Poisoning, although I am a member. I'm also staff at Group 14621 Community Association, which serves a big chunk of the northeast part of the city of Rochester. And I'd like to thank Commissioner White and Commissioner Brennan for sort of beating me to the punch here. I've worked with property owners, and I've been called a bully on occasion for really pushing to have properties made lead safe, not necessarily lead-free. And really working on primary prevention, testing buildings rather than waiting for children to be poisoned. It's morally reprehensible to do it in that manner. Primary prevention puts the children's welfare first. And so my intent was to call upon the city school board to help extend the prevention the city has placed on residential properties, working to make them lead safe, to also ensure that all school buildings are made lead safe. Children spend many hours a day in the school buildings, and from daycares in some of the high schools through all of the elementary and secondary schools. And I'm not convinced that it will be terribly expensive to necessarily do some of this. In some cases, remedies are fairly simple, and in many cases, my hope is that all the school buildings are already lead safe. I also recognize that you are planning on a facilities modernization program, but I would ask that we not wait for that to happen. We need to ensure that the rooms are safe by doing dust wipe tests where the paint is intact, and if the paint is deteriorated, get it tested. It should be done as soon as possible for the well-being primarily of the children, but also for the adults. Adults are also subject to ill effects of lead poisoning. So I will continue to work with all of you and with the school staff to do what we can to make sure that the schools are safe, in addition to the residential properties. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Roby Davidson. Derek Hazel. Thank you, Mr. Hazel. Our next meeting will be March 15, 2007 at 6:30.
Excuse me. I couldn't let the meeting end, if I may, without making one comment. We acted on the strategic plan tonight. We passed that. And I think that Jana Carlisle has already left. She's here. Oh, there you are. I thanked her privately for the work she did on this, she and her staff member, Robert. I think you heard the board members, and you worked really hard to incorporate our input, and I wanted to publicly thank you for that.
Thank you, Jana. Board members, we have to move into executive session, so I will entertain a motion to, sorry, we got business we still got to take care of.
It's about time y'all did some work.
To move it, I will entertain a motion to move into executive session.
So moved.
Move.
So moved.
All right, move seconded. We're now into executive session.
Going downstairs?
Yes.
It's in the binder.
It's always helpful to have some of that stuff pulled out and prioritized.
Hey, you get my message? Let's get together. Okay, all right, yeah, maybe, I don't know if you're going to have a meeting that I could go to. Okay, all right, so just call me and let me know. Especially before this stuff keeps on going. Okay.
Just get this to you. I'll talk to you about that.
Oh, thanks, okay. All right, yeah, I just didn't, I just want to make sure that your membership knows that I want to be connected. Yeah, okay. All right, thanks. See you later, Vicki.
How you doing, Vicki? Oh, I'm ready to go home. I thought I was going to make it out to
What's the latest?
post office on Jefferson before it
Latest you guys
closes.
have ever met?
Oh dear. Probably close to 10.
This didn't set any records. Hey, Darren. Hey, listen, you want a copy of that? Work it. Obviously, do some. Make sure I got their number.
530. I know on the radio you always say.
Yeah. 353160. So they're Oh, yeah. So they're certified. Really?
EPA certified. I mean,
Okay.
I got the one front, they got the XRF gun, the whole nine, they got the staff
Okay.
and everything.
Oh, okay. All right.
All right, thanks.
Read that over. Call me back, and then it's going to committee. So they'll work it. Over.
Yeah,
I think this went well.
I got 3 o'clock.
Oh, did you? Yeah. Yeah. Pass that around. That all right. I'm a copy. I'll see it.
Mr. White,
Yes, sir.
congratulations you coming on
Oh,
this
thank you.
board.
Thank you.
You know, reputation is great.
Thank you.
Get around.
Sir.
Got to understand.
Oh, absolutely. Well, that's where it's got to be.
Did you get a copy of what I left her?
I did. Yeah.
I thought someone on the board contacted me.
Yeah.
That's the same way with the Bears Association. All they have named Mr. Reeves.
Oh, Charles, we're a great guy. He's going to help us with this truancy. We'll be in touch.
Okay,
All right.
thanks.
Take care.